Hey guys, what's up and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hey, I'm Liz and this is Creating Crime Time, where I'm your host and I sit down, I talk about a true crime case and I create something at the same time. So if you're interested and if it piqued your interest, I highly suggest you hit that subscribe button and turn your bell notification on to all, and let's jump into today's true crime case. So today we are going outside of the United States and we're going to Scotland. So we are discussing the case of Bible John. If you don't know who Bible John is, this is an unidentified serial killer that is believed to have murdered 3 young women in Scotland between 1968 and 1969 in Glasgow. So can't really go into who he is. I mean, I kind of can, but we're going to go into his victims and the surroundings. So all of Bible John's victims were young brunette women between the ages of 25 and 32, and all of whom had met their murderer at a place called the Barrowland Ballroom. This was a dance hall and a music venue in Glasgow. The perpetrator has never been identified, and these cases remain both unsolved and one of the most extensive manhunts in Scottish crime history. This case would prove to be the first time in Scotland in which the Crown Office authorized publication of a composite drawing of an individual suspected of murder. So he became identified as Bible John due to having repeatedly quoted from the Bible to have condemned any form of adultery while in the company of his final victim. The known movements, or the MO of Bible John, is that he was a serial killer and a rapist, and they believe that there is a correlation with Peter Tobin, and that Peter Tobin is Bible John due to the fact that he is also a serial killer and a serial rapist. So the first victim we're going to be talking about is Patricia Docker. So on February 23rd of 1968, the body of the 25-year-old auxiliary nurse Patricia Docker was found in the doorway of a lock-up garage by a man who's on his way to work at the Carmichael Place, which is in Battlefield, Glasgow, so like a little suburb of Battlefield. So the location of her body was only a few yards from her house, which is in Langside Place. Her body bore evidence of extensive blunt force trauma, particularly to the face and the head. Her clothing, handbag, watch, and clothes were missing from the crime scene. Her clothing has never been found, although her handbag was later discovered in the river, like from the river cart, by an underwater search unit, whereas her watch was recovered from a pool of water that was close by to her, so it wasn't very far away from her. There was an extensive door-to-door inquiry in the area, and it produced a witness who recalled hearing a female scream, "Leave me alone," the previous evening. Little hard evidence was discovered at the crime scene. However, ambulance men who retrieved the body informed investigators that the victim had been a nurse who worked at the Mearnskirk Hospital, and this was in nearby Renfrewshire. And ultimately, the victim would be formally identified by her father the following day. So Docker was a married mom of one, but she was actually separated from her husband. And the night of the murder, she informed her parents she was going to spend the evening dancing at the Majestic Ballroom in nearby Hope Street. Although for unknown reasons, she chose to spend the majority of her evening at the Barrowland Ballroom instead. And this, they believe, is to attend a over 20s night, so she would be able to be around people that were similar age of her. and these nights were hosted every Thursday. So when she failed to return home that evening, her parents just assumed that she spent the night with a friend. Police inquiries would only determine several days later that in the late evening, Patricia left the ballroom, left Majestic to attend the Barland Ballroom, where she likely encountered her killer. A postmortem autopsy was conducted by Gilbert Forbes at the University of Glasgow Medical School, and it confirmed that her cause of death was strangulation, but her body bore no signs of sexual assault. So, further, due to the state of rigor mortis upon her body at the time of discovery, this indicated she had likely died shortly after she left the ballroom, so it wasn't very long after. Investigators believe that the perp grabbed her and repeatedly punched her and kicked her in the face as she screamed twice, "Leave me alone," and leaving her naked body with nothing but one shoe nearby, close to a doorway of a lock-up garage. And unfortunately, her murder still remains unsolved. Our next case wouldn't happen until the following year, and that is with Jemima McDonald, and this happened on a Saturday, so the 16th of August of 1969. The 32-year-old mother of three named Jemima McDonald also opted to attend the Barland Ballroom and spent the evening dancing. Well, Jemima was a regular at the ballroom, and per her family's custom, her sister Margaret took care of her three kids while she was in her absence. As midnight approached, Jemima was seen by several people in the company of a well-dressed young man who was a slim build and aged between 25 to 35. He was between 6 feet and 6 feet 2 inches in height. He had short brown hair with fair streaks, and likely spoke a distinctive Glaswegian, or did I say that right? Glaswegian accent, and occasionally inserted brief biblical quotes into his conversation. So here's more where the Bible John kind of context comes into play. So Jemima was seen leaving the ballroom shortly after midnight on the 17th of August in the company of this individual, and she was last seen walking towards either Main Street or Landrecy Street in the direction of her home, and this was approximately around 12:40 a.m. So her sister Margaret became concerned when her sister Jemima failed to return home. Later that day, on the 17th of August, she began hearing local rumors about young children that were seen leaving a derelict tenement building in McKeith Street, discussing that there was a body on the premises. So she's just like, what is going on? So that following Monday, Margaret was so concerned that she herself went to that old building. She was fearing the worst, and unfortunately this is when she discovered her own sister's body that was extensively battered, lying face down. Her shoes and stockings were lying beside her. So an autopsy would be performed on Jemima, and it concluded that she had been raped and extensively beaten, particularly around the face, before she was strangled to death with one of her own stockings. Her murder occurred approximately 30 hours before her body was discovered, and unlike Patricia, Jemima was fully clothed, although her underclothing had been torn. And like Docker, she had had her period during the time of her death. So this little piece of information wasn't really released. But so the night of, police were trying to inquire what happened, and several eyewitnesses said that they saw her with a very well-dressed, well-mannered young man, and she had been in the company of him at Barland. Door-to-door inquiries on McKeith Street also produced a woman who remembered hearing female screams on the evening of her murder, although this individual couldn't remember what time, and consequently the police considered this information to have little or no use whatsoever when it came to the actual investigation. So, although the city of Glasgow, the police noted several striking similarities between these cases, including that both women had attended the ballroom, and on the evening of the murder they had been beaten before being strangled with a ligature, were both on their period and had their handbags taken from the crime scene. Initially, both murders were not considered to be the work of the same perp. They didn't believe it was the same person at first. And despite public appeals, the investigation into the murder of Patricia quickly became a cold case, and police had little to no information, owing to both a lack of eyewitness accounts and evidence. The investigation had also been severely hindered by investigators discovering 3 days after her death that Patricia had attended the Barland the night of her murder. So there was a lot of janky police work that was happening. So about 18 months after Jemima was discovered, police became aware of the similarities with her and Patricia's murders. Although they couldn't necessarily link them together, they couldn't completely discount the history and the theory of them being related. So in addition, police were certain that the perp held a high degree of geographical information. So this basically means that their perp may have been a stranger to the district, as none of the eyewitnesses knew exactly who the man was. But this man really probably was shown these places by the females because they were in their company. You know what I mean? They didn't necessarily know the surrounding area, but they had the women there to kind of help them through the area, and then they committed their crime. So, like I said, for the first time in Scotland history is when these cases is where a composite sketch was used, and they widely distributed this with the newspapers and upon TV throughout Scotland in an effort to identify this man. However, both male and female undercover officers performed discreet surveillance at the Barland Ballroom in efforts to identify this suspect. Police surveillance would be ultimately terminated in late October of 1969 due to failing at producing any suspects. They just felt like they were throwing money into a dumpster fire at this point. There was nothing happening. Nobody could get anything. Well, they probably should have kept the detail on, because unfortunately on the 31st of October of 1969 a man was walking his dog and he discovered the body of 29-year-old Helen Paddock. This was behind a tenement building in Scottstown district in Glasgow. Her body was found beside a drain pipe in the back garden of her Earl Street flat. She had been stripped partially, extensively beaten on the face, before being raped and strangled to death with one of her own stockings. So again, the same MO as the other two. The contents of her handbag were scattered around, close to her body, although the handbag itself was missing from the crime scene, so this was something that was a little bit different. Grass and weed stains upon the soles of her feet was present, and her shoes indicated that she struggled, and this was quite a ferocious struggle with her killer. She tried to get away. She had evidently at one point tried to scale a nearby railway embankment, near her back garden, and and she also had a very deep bite mark on her right thigh. So this was a very tragic way of what happened to her. Not that the other two women, it wasn't tragic, but this one, there was a lot more known because there was more of a crime scene present. So this case, because there was already two victims to prior, there was another correlation that was similar with Jemima and Patricia that Helen had, as she also had her period around the same time. Her murderer had placed a sanitary towel between her left arm. So he knew that she had her period, and he took it and then put it somewhere on near her body. So the evening prior to the murder, Helen and her sister Jean Langford had been to the Barrowland Ballroom and were both acquainted with a man named John. One of these individuals said that he worked as a slater and resided in Castlemilk, while the other individual had been a well-spoken man who did not disclose where he actually lived. All four left the Barrowland to head home. The individual named John, who had been Jean's dance partner, walked to George Square to board a bus, while Langford, Puttock, and the individual who had been Puttock's dance partner hailed a taxi. So the trio set off to Glasgow Cross, making a 20-minute westward journey toward Jean's Knightswood residence. There, this is when she left the taxi, which then continued towards Puttock's residence. During conversation between the trio upon this journey, most of the crucial information pertaining to the killer's psychological profile became apparent. So Jean later informed detectives that her sister's companion had been a teetotal individual who repeatedly quoted the Old Testament stories of Moses. And this was during the time she and her sister had conversed with him in the taxi. He also referred to Barrowland as an adulterous den of iniquity. And his disapproval of married women visiting the premises as the court, oh my goodness, he didn't approve of married women that were separated from their husbands to go to a place where they could commit adultery. He didn't like it, and he would quote the Bible, basically. That's all it is. So Jean described the man as being tall, slim, well-dressed young man with reddish or fair rounded hair neatly at the back, and he was between 25 to 30, approximately 5'10" in height, and he had given the name of John Templeton or John Simpleson or John Emerson. He had been polite, well-spoken, and he frequently quoted the Old Testament in the taxi ride home. He did indicate that he was neither a Catholic or a Protestant, so he was pretty open about his religious background. So Jean also stated that the investigators became increasingly clear, it had become increasingly clear that the trio had ridden in a taxi with this man and had considered her presence in the vehicle to be an inconvenience. So he didn't want Jean there, he just wanted to be with Helen, not with Jean. At one point during the ride, he explained to the women the reason he refrained from consuming alcohol was due to his being conditioned so by a strict parental attitude, before adding, "I don't drink at Hogamimi, I pray." So, another religious tick. He also had alluded to his father's beliefs that dance halls were dens of iniquity, with any married women who frequented them as adulterous by nature. So Jean had informed detectives that the man accompanying Paddock was slim and tall, again, something she's already said, who had been well dressed in a cut brown Reed and Taylor brand suit, so he knew his outfits, and he smoked Embassy cigarettes. She also recalled mentioning that he had been familiar with several drinking premises in Yonkers district of Glasgow, and that he had at one stage worked in a laboratory. She also recalled distinct facial features of the man in Puttock's company that had this man had overlapping front teeth, and bouncers at the ballroom dismissed much of the description, claiming that the man in Puttock's company was short and well-spoken individual with black hair. There was a lot of contradicting back and forth. So the last possible sighting of the suspect was made by both a driver and conductor upon a night service bus, who noticed a young man matching Jean's description alighting a bus at the junction of Dunbarton Road and Gray Street, and this was approximately at 2 a.m. on the 31st of October. He was in a particularly disheveled state, with mud stains on his jacket and a livid red mark on his cheek, just beneath one eye. Both witnesses recalled him repeatedly tucking a short cuff of one sleeve into his jacket sleeve. A man's cufflink had been found along the side of Helen Paddock, so hence why he was trying to tuck his sleeve in, basically. This individual was last seen walking towards the public ferry to cross the River Clyde to the south side of the city. So after Helen's murder, this is when they really linked all of them together. So the handbag of each of them were missing. They were all on their period. They were all beaten. They were beaten in the face. They had been murdered after their refusal of engaging in intercourse with their murderer because they were on their period. But there were still signs of sexual assault, and all of these women either were or have been married. Man, so the investigation started within hours of discovery of Helen's body, and due to Jean being there, they tried to use the information she gave, and they did an updated composite sketch of the suspect, and they asked all the dentists in and around Glasgow to examine their records to determine whether they held a record of a male with an overlapping incisor and missing tooth in the upper right jaw. Both lines of inquiry proved that there was nothing. They couldn't find anything. More than 100 detectives worked this case full-time. There was 50,000 witness statements that were taken from door to door, and ultimately 5,000 suspects would be quizzed in relation to the murders in the first year of inquiry alone, but nothing came of it. And Jean also attended these, but as I said, this case is still unsolved and will still remain unsolved. So with that being said, I hope you enjoy, and I'll see you guys tomorrow in another video. Bye, guys.